Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sophie Rhodes from ASHTO, and I think we'll get started. So on behalf of ASHTO, FHWA, and AMPO, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Sophie Rhodes. I'm the Associate Program Manager for Environment at ASHTO, and along with my colleague, Melissa Savage, the Director of ASHTO's Center for Environmental Excellence, we'll go through the agenda and kind of introduce some of the work that the center has been doing. The Center for Environmental Excellence has been doing on environmental justice. We can see today's agenda. After Melissa and I speak, we'll turn it over to Fleming Elamine from FHWA, and he'll talk about some background information on environmental justice, some key FHWA resources, and he'll highlight some of the work that's currently being done in Pennsylvania. From there, we'll have Bill Kirus from AMPO, and then we'll move a little bit into some experience sharing. We've got Erica Lychek from Broward County MPO to talk about some of the work they're doing there. And we would have had Gloria Jeff live today, but she unfortunately wasn't able to make it. However, we've recorded her session and we'll upload that to the ASHTO website at a later date. Before we begin, of course, a little bit of housekeeping. I will be muting all listener lines for today's session. However, you can ask a question at any time through the portal. If you look at the GoToWebinar kind of dashboard on your screen, you should see a function that allows you to ask questions. Please feel free to add any questions you might have, and we'll get through them through the course of the session. Also, I would like to ask for everyone to make sure that your lines are kept muted. And of course, if you have to drop off of the line, please do so and just dial back in if you need to. So let's talk a little bit about the center. Melissa, I'll send it over to you.
Thanks everyone for being on the webinar today. So just briefly give you a couple bullets about the Center for Environmental Excellence at ASHTO. The center has been around since 2001 and is in cooperation with Federal Highway. So we are very fortunate to work closely with Federal Highway on environmental justice as well as many other issues. Our core mission is to promote environmental stewardship and look for ways to streamline the transportation delivery process. The website for the center is environment.transportation.org. And there you will find a lot of information and resources that we have at ASHTO, including case studies and webinar recordings like this one, as well as practitioner handbooks. We also have information on from other outside resources like Federal Highway, for example. So I would encourage you to head on over to our website, again, environment.transportation.org. And Sophie, you can go to the next slide. So as Sophie mentioned, the center has hosted an environmental justice community of practice the last few years. The goal of this community of practice is to provide a place where practitioners can go to exchange best practices and lessons learned. We do this mostly through calls and webinars and peer exchanges. And the purpose of this call is to discuss a workshop that we did recently at the AMPO annual meeting. And I know we'll get a little bit more information on that in just a second, but those are just some examples of the work that the environmental justice community of practice has been doing lately. Next slide. Oh, sure. And I'll kick it over to you, Sophie.
Sure. So earlier this year, the center worked on conducting a survey of environmental justice community of practice members earlier this spring. And these survey questions focused on trainings, information, any kind of resource gap practitioners might be having out in the field, any issues that they might see as emerging or innovative, and of course, just trying to get a read on what resources might still be needing or what resources people might need to be made aware of. From there, we use these results of the survey to hold a webinar to gather more feedback and input from members. And then we use both the survey and the webinar to kind of develop a path forward to address the needs. And again, Melissa's mentioned our website. If you're interested in that, you can see the survey results and view the webinar on our website. And of course, these slides will also be distributed after today's webinar. So a little bit more about the survey. One thing that we were thinking about was how our survey results might also align with some information that we would gather through this peer exchange that we had at the AMPO annual meeting in October. And we did actually see a few, on the surface anyway, a few similarities between needs that our members expressed and information that we gathered through a facilitated roundtable session at the AMPO meeting. And so just a few kind of bullet points. We noticed that practitioners were talking about the need for a methodology to identify environmental justice populations. From the survey, it was clear to us that there were a lot of questions about working with data, whether it's gathering the data, maintaining the data, and really just knowing how to work with the data once you have data. Another thing that people seem to be interested in were public involvement and public involvement strategies. So at least on some of these bulleted points, the center is going to be holding another webinar in January, at the end of January, January 27th at 3 p.m. on the Census Transportation Planning Products Program, which will give a little bit more information about how the census might be used for environmental justice and transportation purposes. And we're also working on a public involvement domestic scan task as part of the current work program. So those are just some items. And Melissa, I'll give it back to you.
Sure, thanks, Sophie. So just to give a quick review of some of the history on the environmental justice issue that we've worked on through the center, in 2016, there was a peer exchange held, and the outcome of that peer exchange was this roadmap that you see a graphic of there on your screen. It can also be found at our website. But the main goal of this document is to help guide and make some recommendations for Federal Highway and AASHTO to undertake. And we've been working closely with Federal Highway over the last few years to kind of address some of the recommendations that were laid out in this roadmap. So if you have any questions about our status on some of those, you can certainly let us know. We'd be happy to give you a status update on that. Next slide, Sophie. So some other outcomes of the roadmap was to add this environmental justice community of practice forum to the center's work plan. And we have been hosting community of practice engagements for the last 3 years through the center. And all of those, again, not to overstate it, are available on the website. We also have been very thoughtful about making sure to include EJ-focused sessions at the AASHTO Committee on Environment Sustainability annual meetings over the last couple of years. And as Sophie mentioned, we will be working on a public involvement domestic scan this year and into 2020, as well as we're working with Fleming at Federal Highway to plan and host a virtual peer exchange on environmental justice. Next slide.
Sure. So to kind of give everyone a little bit of background about our webinar topic for today, we ended up leading a work session at AMPO, or a peer exchange at the AMPO annual meeting in collaboration with AMPO and FHWA. And it kind of grew, I think, out of a proposal regarding environmental justice analysis, that work that's being done in Pennsylvania. So we had kind of some people there setting the scenes from FHWA. We had a couple updates. And after that, then we broke out into groups and walked through a facilitated roundtable exercise. So I don't need to go too much into detail, but essentially each table had a leader who had some specific questions to ask. These questions focused on how agencies are conducting environmental justice analysis, how this analysis fits into planning and programming, again, looking at maybe resources needs and any challenges and opportunities that practitioners had out in the field. So primarily because it was at AMPO, most of the people that were participating were from MPOs, but we also had a few state DOT members. So that kind of gives you a little background as we continue forward. And here you can see the contact information for the AASHTO Environment Team. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Melissa or myself or anybody that's on this page. And I think that's it for the AASHTO portion. Fleming, I'll send the presentation or I'll send the recording rights over to you. So you should be able to talk now.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Really appreciate it. Um, for those who don't know, my name is Fleming Alamina. Work as a community planner with FHWA's Office of Human Environment, Washington, D.C. headquarters, and my focus area is environmental justice and public involvement. For today, I'm going to go through some slides pretty quickly. This gives an overview of what we covered at the peer exchange at the AMPO conference, but then I'll have some contact information at the end for follow-up. So next slide, please. So first and foremost, just wanted to quickly go over our guiding principles as it relates to environmental justice. At FHWA, we're focused on identifying and addressing disproportionately high and adverse effects of the agency's programs, policies, and activities on minority populations and low-income populations. And this is done to achieve an equitable distribution of benefits and burdens throughout the transportation system. United States. The guiding principles on the right side of the slide are USDOT's guiding principles to ensure that there's meaningful public involvement of all populations during transportation decision making, and that we actively mitigate any identified disproportionately high and adverse effects on minority and low-income populations. Next slide, please. So this slide just kind of gives a real quick overview of our the EJ directives and policy references, starting with Executive 12898, 1994. This basically called federal agencies to action related to environmental justice, requiring that federal agencies make it a part of their mission to achieve environmental justice by identifying and addressing disproportionately high and adverse effects of policies, programs, activities on low-income populations and minority populations. And a part of that, after that executive order was in place, here at USDOT implemented a DOT-wide order to how we would implement the requirements of the executive order. And there's a strategy that outlines the guiding principles in more detail. And the order, the FHWA followed with its own order specific to our federal aid recipients of how to address EJ in planning and project development. And then lastly, there's some specific guidance that was released from our office on how to address how to address environmental justice during the NEPA process. And all these references are available on our website. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives a quick overview of some of the things we're involved in relating to environmental justice programmatic activities. Again, you've heard our involvement with the Center for Environmental Excellence. We continue to coordinate on resource development and training and peer exchanges. Also through TRB, there's an environmental justice committee that we coordinate and collaborate on research projects. In addition, that committee, as well as several other standing committees of TRB, are planning an equity conference for 2021, and there'll be more on that at the TRB meeting coming up next month. So this just kind of gives a quick rundown of some of the things we're involved in. In addition, we have a FHWA environmental justice working group. There's a DOT environmental justice working group, and also interagency federal working group on environmental justice that EPA leads. Next slide. Yeah, we can skip over this one. So many of the resources I'll speak about briefly today are on our website. Our website contains all the policy documents, related statutes, FAQs, case studies, training resources, as well as information on Title VI, transportation equity, and their interrelationships. All of that information is available on our website, and just wanted to provide the link here as well as a snapshot for our website. So we can keep going here. In addition, we also have a public involvement website. This website is kind of a clearinghouse for all public involvement resources. And one resource I wanted to mention specifically is a public involvement reference tool, which includes all the public involvement plans for all 52 state DOTs, also Title VI plans. And if you look on the left side of the screen about third of the way down is a reference tool. If you click on that, it'll take you to that document. So if you are looking for examples of other state public involvement plans, they're all listed there. In addition to our general public involvement, we also have a virtual public involvement link, which is at the very bottom of the slide, and that is through our Everyday Counts 5 innovation. And currently we're providing technical assistance related to virtual public involvement and helping state DOTs with mobile applications, project visualization, do-it-yourself videos, virtual town halls, a host of resources related to helping people participate remotely, or also enhancing in-person meetings through various digital tools. So that's something that we're actively involved in, and there's much more information as well as webinar recordings through that virtual public involvement link. Next slide. And this is, I just wanted to provide this slide because our transportation planning capacity building website has recently been revamped. And this has information on one, public involvement generally, but also there's an opportunity for state DOTs or MPOs to request technical assistance through the website. These are regional in nature generally, but there's a host of resources related to the planning process, and just wanted to let everyone know that this is a really good resource and a clearinghouse for both environmental justice information as well as public involvement, which snapshot is on the screen now. That's it for that one. So now I'll just quickly go over some of our resources. One of our most foundational resources is Environmental Justice Reference Guide. This was published, almost 5 years ago now, and it basically kind of outlines how environmental justice is incorporated in every phase of transportation decision making, and provides some good examples and case studies of how to incorporate EJ throughout the process. It also provides information on how FHWA complies with the requirements of the executive order. And so this is our go-to guide, and certainly if folks are not familiar with it, it is also available on our website for download. And it basically outlines really good practices for incorporating environmental justice in transportation decision making. Next slide. So this is one resource. I think this is about 3 years old now, but it includes several case studies from small towns and rural areas throughout the country related to incorporating environmental justice, and it specifically looks at public involvement strategies to better engage environmental justice populations in rural and small communities. And the 8 steps on the screen is basically what's the questions that are answered in each of the case studies that are provided. So this might be of interest to practitioners as well. Next slide. Also, I wanted to mention, many may be familiar with our Community Impact Assessment, or CIA, reference guide. The first one was produced in 1996, and this was just updated last year, 2018, with new resources. There's some updated best practice examples, new and updated strategies and techniques for conducting a community impact assessment. And this is also known as our Purple Book. It provides recent examples for assessing impacts and tracking mitigation commitments throughout the project development phase. And as well as various public involvement strategies to accurately assess community impacts related to a particular action. So if you're not familiar with that resource, that's another good one to take a look at. Next slide. Okay, so the ones I just mentioned are a year or so old. The next 2 references were just published this year, a little earlier this year. And these are the 2 references that we spoke more in detail about at the peer exchange, but I'll just go through them fairly quickly. One is more specific to environmental justice analysis during the transportation planning and programming phase. And we looked at over 100 MPOs throughout the country, noting effective practices for conducting environmental justice during the planning phase. And so you can see what we covered and had examples of numerous MPOs And then some state DOTs, but this was primarily MPOs in this document that were highlighted. We give examples of meaningful involvement strategies, best practices for identifying EJ populations and understanding their concerns and needs, assessment of benefits and burdens, determinations of disproportionately high and adverse effects, then the deployment of strategies to address those disproportionately high and adverse effects, both looking at imbalances in needs, transportation system, and then we wrap up the publication with overarching best practices. Next slide. So for the sake of time, not going through all 7, but I did want to just kind of highlight some of the overall best practices, and we did note there were at the statewide level approaches for integrating EJ analysis at the statewide scale. We had some state DOTs that were really doing a good job with that, and then we took a look at some MPOs and state DOTs that notably expressed how they incorporated planning and environmental linkages, community impact assessment process, and incorporation of context-sensitive solutions and design processes in their environmental justice analysis process. So more information is available in that publication, which is on our website. Next slide. Another publication we spent time on, which was also published this year in the spring, was a changing demographics, addressing changing demographics in EJ analysis. And basically on the slide is kind of the outline or table of contents for the publication. And we also noted 5 best practice case examples with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the San Francisco Bay Area, Atlanta Regional Commission, Florida DOT, and the Metro MPO in the Portland, Oregon area. Next slide. So this slide just gives a little context of why this was important to take a look at. And then we also had some overarching research questions. Basically, we were looking to determine how demographic change was impacting, or if it was impacting, how each analysis was being conducted, if states or MPOs were taking account or keeping good track of demographic change and the rate of demographic change in their communities, and then some best practices for considering changing demographics when engaging EJ populations and conducting the analysis, and how that informed the decision-making process. Next slide. And so basically what we came away with this one is that it really came down in terms of kind of keeping a really good check on how things were changing in the respective communities that we examined, was public involvement and really engaging the community in more than just a desktop exercise, but actually being very knowledgeable of the community, going out frequently to do assessments, and having different engagement processes that helped the agency really keep track of dynamics that were changing, demographic dynamics. And so we noted a lot of the best practice examples throughout the report related to that, in addition to actually just noting how the population shifts and where they are occurring on a national scale. Next slide. So this report, one thing we did come away with was just some questions to consider both at the local level to determine if a community is effectively keeping track of demographic change, and how to basically consider that during the analysis process. And then we also talked about planned investments. One thing I did want to mention is that in a couple examples, we talked about couple MPOs that were actually doing gentrification risks based on development pipeline and how that was being considered, particularly in San Francisco and Portland. So there's some good information in the report about how they do that process. But again, these are just some questions on the screen here that we thought were good takeaways for every state and MPO to consider as they do their EJ analysis. Next slide. And this is just a snapshot of some of the best practices or notable practices we've noted in the report. Again, you can take a look at that when you have some time. And I won't go through this, but just to give you a sense of some of the things we captured. And then the 5 case studies that are in the report go into great detail about every step of the analysis process and how changing demographics were considered in those particular areas. Next slide. So I wanted to just mention, so those reports were just released this year. One that we're developing now is a set of 9 case studies in 8 states that specifically delve into the actual innovative strategy to meaningfully involve underserved populations in the decision-making process. The focus of the case studies look at minority populations, low income, limited English proficiency, as well as individuals in rural areas. So there's a mix of case studies throughout the country in different contexts, different population groups. And so this is expected to be out in March of next year, February, March. So keep everyone posted on that. Another element of this document, it features some best practice for tribal coordination and engaging persons with disability or mobility challenges. Next slide. So just wanted to quickly go over a couple training resources. One is related to the census transportation planning products. There's both online application or e-learning module that is now available. There's basic transportation analysis through the CTPP web-based software, which also features some tutorial videos. Then there's also some census transportation data in-person training that's available. And this is actually through AASHTO, but it has really helped practitioners analyze EJ populations as well as demographic analysis related to understanding how to better identify EJ populations and assess their transportation needs. So just wanted to make note, and the links are on the web slide on the slide here for additional information on that resource. Next slide. So these are just a few courses that are available through the National Highway Institute, or NHI. We have a Fundamentals of Environmental Justice web-based course, which is available and free to anyone. That's very a good course to take if you're just starting to do work in the EJ analysis space. Most recently, we developed an in-person instructor-led environmental justice analysis course, which is a 2-day in-person course. And that one goes much into detail of how to do the analysis, both during the planning phase and the project development and NEPA phase. We've had a few deliveries and making a few tweaks here and there, but that one is now available through the National Highway Institute. Additionally, a new web-based course that was just released a couple months ago. It's called the Basics of Public Involvement in Transportation Decision Making. That is also free and available through the NHI website. And one course that is now under development is Title VI Analysis. It'll be an instructor-led course, and that one will probably not be available until late next year, but I'll keep everyone abreast of progress on that as well. Next slide. Also, just wanted to quickly mention, in addition to the NHI resources, FHWA has a resource center that provides targeted technical assistance. Generally, requests come through the state DOT, through the FHWA division office for specific needs. Also, MPOs can request specific training related to environmental justice, equity, NEPA, you name it, but I'll provide the link there. And also the National Transit Institute, which is managed through F2A, has an environmental justice course, both a fundamentals course and an advanced workshop on environmental justice. Next slide. We can keep going. So quickly, I'll just go over, at the peer exchange, we had Keith Lynch from the FHWA Pennsylvania division, as well as William Clark from the York County area MPO in Pennsylvania shared kind of approach that they have taken to do environmental justice analysis at the regional level, and there was a compilation of 6 MPOs in South Central Pennsylvania. But this basically started with Pennsylvania DOT provided some statewide environmental justice guidance in 2004 that was updated in 2012. And essentially, it was called Every Voice Counts, which is available on their website. And it was basically set out using some of the resources that I've just mentioned to want to help MPOs in the state of Pennsylvania identify EJ populations within their planning areas, to engage EJ populations in the public involvement process, assess the effects of transportation policies and investments on EJ populations, and then lastly to avoid, minimize, or mitigate as appropriate disproportionately high and adverse effects. But even after putting out this guidance, PennDOT still learned that there was some issues related to specifically how to do the analysis. And so with different regions or within the state, different population areas, there was just not enough to provide clear examples of a standard methodology or one size fits all related to EJ analysis. And so that is where the South Central MPO example comes into play. So next slide. So using that guidance as well as some of the FHWA resources I mentioned, there were, I guess all of these MPOs are medium size and located in South Central PA. And they all within District 8 of the Pennsylvania DOT. They built on the Every Voice Counts document to develop a unified EJ guide that helps to actually develop a scalable but unified methodology for conducting environmental justice analysis. And so they gave specific examples of identifying, and this was basically kind of predicated to know what the minimum requirements was, regardless of the size of your planning area, what would be required at minimum, and then that's scalable depending on the actual size of the MPO or district area. But essentially, the methodology relates to identifying populations, assessing needs, and identifying the sorry, there's a little typo on there. The condition, doing assessment of the conditions, including questions about demographics and transportation surveys, then development of the TIP or LRTP, then the evaluation of benefits and burdens, and then finally addressing disproportionate high and adverse effects based on the findings. So this is the first time that there was 6 MPOs that had an interregional collaborative process to conduct EJ analysis methodology process. And so there's more information. There's actually a report. This is the cover of the report on this page. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just give a quick example of how they conducted this. So on this slide, it just provides some background of how they identify the unified practice category. And then there's within the plan, what is considered core, what is a first level enhancement, a second level enhancement, and this basically kind of runs down everything in their planning process. And they also mentioned during the peer exchange that it is really help with asset management and making prioritization decisions related to that, with overlaid with the EJ considerations. There's much more details in the report itself. So next slide. So this is finally just some websites for additional information, FHWA, both on the public involvement and environmental justice website links. And then I think the next slide is the final slide. And these are some contacts. Contact with the FHWA headquarters office, including myself, and then with the Pennsylvania division office contacts, as well as the York County area MPO, William Clark, who I mentioned previously, who participated in the peer exchange. And I think that concludes it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fleming. And at this point, I'd just like to remind anyone, if they have any questions they'd like to ask, feel free to use the questions box on the GoToWebinar. Right now, I'll send the presentation over to Bill from AMPO. Let me unmute him. We should be good to go.
Great, thank you, Sophie. My name is Bill Caruso, and I'm the Technical Programs Director at the Association of MPOs here in Washington, D.C. Before I just mention briefly a couple of activities that AMPO will have going on in 2020 that may be of interest to this group, I just wanted to certainly thank AASHTO, the center, Melissa, Sophie, and the team for the opportunity to partner on this important effort. We look forward to the continued collaboration in 2020 and going forward, and certainly thank you to FHWA and funding for all of the important resources that were just reviewed. We truly appreciate all the work that you do at FHWA for the MPOs and the DOTs. So real quick, before I just jump into a few things, I did want to remind everybody that all of the presentations and materials from the peer exchange that did happen at the AMPO annual conference are posted to the AMPO website. So if you would like to jump on and pull down a couple of the presentations or related materials, please feel free to do so. And if you have any trouble finding them, feel free to shoot me an email and we'll get those over to you. And as Sophie had noted, there will be a summary, and once that summary is ready to go, we'll get that posted and out to the group as well. So just a couple of initiatives that may be of interest to those with us today. AMPO has a number of working groups that we facilitate, and two of those, there's an awful lot of overlap naturally with environmental justice. One being our public involvement working group, and the other being our GIS working group. And so we're certainly talking with Melissa, Sophie, and the team about possibly doing a couple of joint webinars in the new year between our public involvement working group and certainly our GIS working group, looking at how to utilize GIS tools and applications to help tell the EJ story. So we'll continue to have those conversations, and as soon as we're able to get something on the calendar, we'll definitely let everybody know. If there are folks on the phone that are interested in adding their name to that listserv for either of those two working groups, definitely shoot me a note and we'll get you added. And then just another couple of opportunities coming up in 2020 and early 2021. Our next annual conference will be in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Metropolitan Council will be the host, and that will be in October. However, the presentation proposal portal will be opened up in February, just in a couple of months here. And so you'll be seeing some email traffic, and again, we'll certainly coordinate with Melissa and Sophie to make sure that that notice gets out. And environmental justice and Title VI and equity is certainly a popular topic on our agenda every year, year over year. And so I suspect there'll be at least one session, if not more, focusing on this topic. And so we strongly encourage folks to submit some proposals from your region or your state. And please note that that is not limited to just MPOs. We certainly encourage our DOT partners to submit proposals as well for the great work that y'all are doing. And then later in August, we will be opening up the proposal portal for our upcoming Planning Tools and Training Symposium. This will be in May of 2021, and that will be in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And we certainly look forward to working with Erica and the Broward MPO as we head into that symposium. And that symposium is much more technical. Our annual conference is a little bit higher level, and the symposium is a little bit smaller in terms of attendance and the program. However, we get a little bit more into the weeds on a number of different topics, including environmental justice, and it just provides a great opportunity for some peer exchange. And so I'll leave it at that. Again, the annual conference proposals will be opened up in February. The symposium will be going out in August, so stay tuned for some additional info there. And we continue to look forward to partnering and collaborating with Melissa, Sophie, and the team. So if you have any questions about anything that I just covered or anything going on at AMPO, please feel free to contact me at any time, and I'm happy to provide any additional information. Thanks, Sophie.
Good afternoon. This is Gloria Jeff with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, but in my other life, I serve as the chair of the TRB Committee on Transportation and Environmental Justice. What I hope to achieve with you this afternoon as part of the recap of the AMPO AASHTO peer exchange is to change the slide, be able to chat with you about the facilitated roundtable discussion in which I had the opportunity to participate and what some of the key takeaways from that particular session were. The facilitated roundtable discussion, next slide please, focused on two sort of critical questions. The first was, what are the current practices, challenges, and opportunities that the attendees were facing with respect to analysis in environmental justice? And then what potential actions might be taken and what were successful practices that have been undertaken? The table that I was a part of focused on just one of these issues having to do with current practices, challenges, and opportunities. Some of the next slide, please. Key takeaways were focusing on the critical importance of meaningful public involvement. When they talked about meaningful public involvement, it meant not only saying, okay, we know where our environmental justice populations are, but really understanding who these people were and what their needs and concerns were. And it wasn't just about their ability to get from point A to point B, but the transportation was much more than that for them. It was part of the fiber of their communities. It was the essential element that allowed them to achieve the quality of life that they had. And it also helped to identify the sense of place where that community was. It also focused on the fact that there are changing demographics. It used to be in the good old days, we could easily categorize the environmental justice populations or the traditionally underrepresented populations without a problem. Today, with the number of options within the census and with the self-identification and people being able to identify in multiple categories, we find ourselves having to look differently at those. And that's one of the key takeaways, is that the nature of even the quantitative analysis is changing. It also came out of that conversation the importance of not only quantitative methods and tools, but also that there are qualitative methods as well. For example, here in the state of Minnesota, we use the cultural mapping as one of the ways to identify our traditionally underrepresented. And what we meant by cultural mapping was not just the traditional demographics that you find in the census, but also taking the time to understand why they were there, when they came there, why they stay there, and what may cause them to leave. So that we really had a comprehensive understanding of not only how folks traveled, but why they were physically where they were located and what might prompt movements, so that we were able not only to identify their transportation needs of today, but be able to identify what they might be in the future. The third sort of key takeaway was this idea of recognizing that one shoe does not fit everybody, that there are metropolitan planning organizations that are 2 and 3 people operations, and there are others with hundreds of staff, and that the quality and deep dive that is possible will vary by the size of the metropolitan planning organization, as well as the capacity of the state departments of transportation. In the case study that you will have heard about, there was an entire dialogue about what more was. What did it mean to you can do more? Was it that you can do an additional analysis? Is there more that you need to look at in terms of identifying not just the impacts and whether they were disproportionate or not, but what was the role of transportation for certain population cohorts? It also, one of the key things that everybody walked away with and everybody agreed on, that success is not a check box. It isn't, yes, I did an environmental justice analysis, therefore I have completed, but it's understanding what that analysis told you. How did that analysis influence choices with respect to the project and the project activities that were to be undertaken? It also helped you to understand that it's not just a checkbox in the context of, I did this, it has no impact on decision making. It is not information that we share with our key decision makers, and it's not information that we use outside of this project. All of those were non-starters. They had to be, all of those needed to be an essential part of defining what success was for an environmental justice analysis. And then finally, the Federal Highway presentation did a wonderful job of making us aware of a full cadre of new resources, both in terms of analysis tools as well as techniques, work that others had done, um, individuals that we could contact, and upcoming training and publications. And so for us, those were our 5 key takeaways that helped to inform what were the top 5 takeaways that would come out of the overall session among the various groups. And then finally, let me put on my hat as the chair of the TRB Committee on Environmental Justice and invite you to be a part of our 2020 annual meeting sessions and committee meeting. The information on all of those is available on our website as well as on the TRB annual meeting site. In addition, TRB has recently created a new subcommittee on transportation equity. That group has begun that deeper dive to look not only at the quantitative and qualitative methodologies by which we do EJ analysis, but looking at key questions around what is equity, how do you measure it, how do you know whether or not it's been achieved. One of the immediate products of that effort is that you'll be able to see at the 2020 annual meeting of the Transportation Research Board is a curated track on equity. It is a series of sessions that will focus on research that's been undertaken, on case studies of work that's been done, on thought papers that are all focused on this idea of transportation equity. In addition, there will be a major half-day workshop on Thursday, January the 16th, at the very end of the TRB annual meeting that will focus on equity with respect to transportation, as well as this issue of environmental justice and how does it nest in to this whole issue around equity. And of course, we've got our mid-year meeting coming up. The date and time have not yet been determined, but more will follow. Again, stay tuned to the TRB Committee on Environmental Justice and Transportation website, as well as the Joint Subcommittee on Transportation Equities website. Looking forward to seeing everybody at the TRB annual meeting and looking forward to seeing the final products of this effort. If you have any questions, please submit them in writing, and you can reach me at gloria.jeff@state.mn.us. My phone number is also listed there, and looking forward to hearing from all of you. And to the learning experience for all of us. Thank you.
From now, I'll turn over the presentation to Erica Lychuk from Broward County. She's going to share a little bit about her experiences at the AMPO session that we hosted and talk a little bit about the work that they're doing in Broward County. Erica, I think you should be good as long as you unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Okay, so yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Lychak. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of information on the peer exchange, and then, I'll get into a little bit of the work that the Broward MPO is doing in the realm of kind of Title VI and equity. So first off, the peer exchange really, from someone, who attended as an MPO, it really was a great opportunity first and foremost to kind of just gather colleagues together, meet your counterparts kind of across the country, but also just to kind of share some of the challenges, the successes, bounce ideas off of one another, et cetera. And I know Sophie kind of set the framework a little bit, but certainly wanted to say thank you for, creating this and for all the partnerships that went into making it happen. Really seeing that equity is a focus and a priority is really encouraging for those of us who are kind of working in that day to day. So just a couple of things I wanted to share, kind of takeaways and observations from the peer exchange. So the first one is that in conversation, it was certainly kind of noticed by all of us that we had a broad range of equity Title VI engagement. There was different varying levels of knowledge, levels of use and engagement with the existing tools available, but then even just kind of equity in general. There were some that were doing a lot, others not so much, and even some who were just completely overwhelmed and didn't know where to start. So really interesting to see that there are kind of varying stages of the equity process kind of displayed and out there in the world. But kind of the consensus and some of the things that we got from our conversations with one another, I would want to share a couple of them, is we, even amongst ourselves, had noted that this is a conversation where we can often get really technical very quickly, even amongst ourselves as transportation professionals. We find ourselves talking in very technical ways very quickly. So there really kind of was an aim or a goal or a hope that we could, work together through our different peer exchanges and experiences to find a way to simplify, whether we did that through some kind of an elevator pitch or an elevator speech, something where we can just distill down what we're trying to do when we talk about equity. I know it's a bear and it's a huge thing, but a way to really just kind of, distill it down to what we're really trying to achieve when we talk equity, and then be able to take that out into our respective kind of communities. So what ties into that, and we all really kind of agreed, is that all of the data that we collect and the information that we put together is really important, but we also understood that we're never going to use data to replace really good public involvement and the community outreach and the connections that we really need to have to our communities and to our demographics, and to know who those people are, because at the end of the day, we do all of this analysis and observations, but it really is about people. And it's making sure that we're still having that person to person connection when we're trying to tackle something like equity. And I think one of the other sort of shared goals that all of us at least had in the table that I was working with, no matter the size of the MPO, the type of the agency, is that we all really want to find ways to have equity resonate in a meaningful way and be a topic that we can talk about, have it resonate in a meaningful way, but then also to go beyond just kind of checking the box. So finding ways to kind of elevate our involvement and our engagement with it. So certainly was, a valuable experience, and I hope to see more of them, because as I said, I really felt encouraged having been there, and then also just the ability to share some of the good things that we've been doing at the MPO, and then put those resources in the hands of our colleagues across the country and say, hey, you know what, that was a challenge for us too, but this is what we did, this is how we tried to tackle it, so, please take this, use it as well, and, we all benefit from the experience. So with that transition, I'm just going to go through a few slides again of what we've been up to. So the Broward MPO is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So we serve Broward County, and with a population of about 1.8 million and 31 municipalities. So we've kind of got a lot going on. So it certainly makes it challenging, but we're up to the task. So Sophie, I'll ask you to go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So we kind of covered some of the framework, but I just, want to give a little bit of a origin story as to how we decided to tackle creating an equity assessment. So again, that wanting to go beyond checking the box, wanting to make this something a little bit more meaningful. At the MPO, what we did is we asked ourselves the questions of, well, how can we do more? And how can we take whatever it is that we do and standardize that process? Because, any agency receiving federal funds, we know, has to adhere to the requirements. And at our MPO in Broward, we've been using equity assessments. We've been looking at it, but nothing had been really standardized. So, if you were doing the TIP, it might be done this way. If you're doing your long range plan, it might be done this way. A lot of times, too, you engage with consultants who would provide a methodology or an approach, which in and of itself, none of them are bad. It's just that we really wanted as our goal to create a process, not only that we had standardized, but that went above those requirements, beyond just that checking the box. So the process was to create a working group within the MPO, and we wanted project managers from all of the different core products, so that any efforts that we engaged in, we were really working kind of hands-on with staff. So we wanted to be able to, build an assessment that would, again, analyze and evaluate, but we were always very careful to approach this in a way that we knew it wasn't a fix-all. It wasn't going to be this is the definitive tool. As soon as you get your output, that's it, that's all, you've done equity, it's finished. And, definitely at the MPO, we echoed a lot of the statements that our peers made at the exchange, which is that you're never going to replace that really good sort of community and public involvement. So next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of a idea of what the actual output of this equity assessment looks like, we took the 7, what I would say are traditionally required indicators that are tied to any of the non-discrimination authorities, and we use that as the kind of base analysis factors. But the other thing that we did is we built in a secondary set of factors that, depending on what you're trying to achieve or what you're really trying to understand, you could turn on or off. So the standard factors that we have are things like limited English proficiency, those of older, those who are younger, racial, ethnic minority. But when we talk secondary factors, we're talking about things like maybe a no high school diploma, or a zero vehicle household, or perhaps a female-led household, single parent. So things like that allow you to really, within the data set, customize what you want the output to look like. Now, this is what you'll see. This map is a sample of the output, which is an equity area map. And again, as I've said, it's not intended to be that definitive identifier of any of the EJ populations. It is meant to be used as a guide. And when you see the legend, you'll see that the white is low and the dark blue is very high, understanding that low isn't good, very high isn't bad. It's simply those concentrations of demographic indicator populations in any of the areas of our region. And again, what this allowed us to do was to provide a consistent way to analyze the demographic data. We wanted to take it out of the realm of being subjective, that any user kind of based scoring, all of that was gone. Now it was based on data, because oftentimes, and again, I'm echoing the experiences of the peer exchange, I heard, well, how do you define equity? Well, how do you define equity? And what the Broward MPO decided to do, what we realized is that we wanted to make this a data-driven exercise, so that when you see those outputs, you still have to look at them and they begin discussions, but it isn't that I'm able to, use my own sort of verbiage or any sort of, subjective element in analyzing the demographics of the area. So again, it calculates a composite equity score. So it takes the 7 factors that we initially identified, and that composite from low to very high. But the flexible geography was something else we wanted to build into this, so that you could look at it from a county standpoint, which is what you see there, but you can really drill down. And we have an interactive version of the map where you can drill down as far as, a specific intersection in any community, and you're able to click on that colored block, and it gives you not only the reason why it was from low to very high, but also a specific breakdown of percentage. So for example, if it was very high because there was limited English proficiency, then you could actually, as I said, click on that and see the languages that are spoken. So the uses of this we thought were really wide-ranging, and we want this to be used throughout all of, again, our plans and programs. So the next slide, please, Sophie. So the first place that we use this and kind of put this equity assessment through its paces, so to speak, was with our Commitment 2045, which is our MTP, or our long-range plan. So you'll see that little green bubble, and we said, so we've identified the equity areas, we've put them on this pretty map. Well, now what? What do you do with them? So we wanted for the assessment to really be able to be used on 3 scalable levels. So the first one is the project system or concept. So that's where we're looking at our long-range plan. We're looking at the bigger picture. And then the second level in which you could use it would be project development, where you're looking at, sub-area, corridor studies, when you start to dig in that next level to specific projects. And then the third one is the project investment. So in the case of the Broward MPO, for us, that the first place we wanted to look at was our TIP, to look at where we're investing those dollars, where those projects are being built, And understanding that, well, I should say the challenge that we had is that the TIP at the end of the day is just a list of projects. So how are you able to kind of analyze equity against a list of projects? And what we realized is that this becomes more of a trends over time kind of feedback loop. So we started this with our long range plan. We would see that through the projects that develop through the plan, which then become part of the TIP, and then looking at that TIP investments over time, which then help to provide feedback the next time we do our long range plan. So it's, the sort of never ending transportation planning circle where equity is a key part of that. So next slide, please, Sophie. Now, again, I mentioned very early on that with this, we wanted this to be something that would be used across all of our different plans and programs. So some of the ways that we have already implemented this is we have a Complete Streets and Localized Initiatives program, or CSLIP, which is a grant-based program, competitive, that we offer to our local municipalities, sometimes for smaller projects. And equity is part of that application, and it's part of the scoring process or I should say the prioritization process for the projects that are chosen. We recently completed a Complete Streets Master Plan. Now, the assessment is in the finishing stages now. So we've actually just presented this to our MPO board, and we're going to be making a whole bunch of resources available, which I'll get to in just a slide or two. But what we're going to be doing is when our Complete Streets Master Plan gets updated again, now that our assessment is complete, we'll be utilizing that methodology to identify equity. We're also working on a mobility hub program, so equity will be used as part of that analysis. And then when we look at monitoring, so rather than the project prioritization, when we look at project investment and monitoring, that's where we're taking equity and looking at it in terms of our TIP. So all of this to really say that rather than equity, which traditionally has been something we look at not necessarily after the fact, but more once the projects are ready, what we're trying to do is to take equity and put it at the very beginning of the process, so that we look at it through the prioritization of our projects that then allow us to track that through the life cycle. So that's where, as I was mentioning with our long range plan, we made equity one of the prioritization factors and part of the criteria that was used to ultimately prioritize the projects. So next slide, Sophie, please. So I mentioned resources, and this is what we're just in the process of uploading to our MPO website right now. If you recall, I mentioned an interactive version of the map. So that's what you can see in the background, where what I've done is I've taken a screenshot and actually honed in on one of those dark blue or very high areas to give you just a sense of what it looks like. So you can see, why it is that was a very high equity area, but then also to provide the details as to why. On our website, so browardmpo.org, there is a resources tab where you can download the equity tool. There'll be a methodology report as well, so that the other beautiful thing about this tool is that it uses census and ACS data, which is in the process of being updated. So, don't do it just yet. But when you download that information packet from your individual geographic area, wherever that is, you take that packet, you basically drop it into this equity assessment, and rather than you seeing a map of Broward County, you're going to see a map of your area. It's going to give you a breakdown of this same nature of all of the different things that you would be looking at in your area, as well as those secondary tools. So the last thing we're going to be doing, which again, we're in the process of putting up onto our website, is an information kit and a resource guide to take you through the step-by-step. Some of the questions we're looking at, like what is the equity assessment? What does equity mean? But then also, as I said, step-by-step through the process so that you can use this tool, you can speak to the tool or to the resource and what it actually is, but then also, feel like you have all of the information at your fingertips to use this throughout any of your different plans and programs. So next slide, Sophie. And I think that might be my last one. So yes, with that, I'll hand it back to Sophie. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Erica. And we still have a few moments. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, please feel free to ask them in the questions box. I think I'd like to thank all of our speakers today and our participants. Like I said, we'll be updating all of this information and uploading both the slides when they're finalized, as well as the presentations to the center's website. We strongly urge you to explore the center's website again at environment.transportation.org for more information. And in the coming weeks, we'll also be preparing a summary document of the AMPO session for everybody who couldn't be there. Also, we have a brief survey that we've prepared for this webinar. So we strongly urge you or ask you, if you have a minute after this is over, please go ahead and fill out the survey to help us make better or help us improve on our webinar delivery going forward. It looks like I have one question. Let's see. Having a little trouble opening the question box. This person asked, this is a question for you, Erica. They wanted to know why isn't equity part of the prioritization for projects funded in the TIP? If you're able to speak on that.
Sure. So what we did is we took the equity assessment, and our first sort of use of it is through our long-range transportation plan. So while we put it as the part of the project prioritization, or one of the project prioritization factors for the long-range plan, what that means is then once it goes from the long-range plan, you go through a needs plan, a cost feasible plan, which ultimately does lead to your TIP or to your transportation improvement plan. So while we haven't had a chance to implement it yet, it is being implemented simply because we're starting at the beginning of the process with our long-range plan. I'm hoping that makes sense.
All right, thank you. Then we kindly ask that you complete the survey. Thank you again for everyone for joining us today, and we hope to interact with you on future webinars. Thanks, everybody.